Welcome to another episode of Tech Dialogue. In this episode, I have a very special guest, and I'm smiling already because we've not kicked it for a while. So it's nice to kind of get him back on, and I'm going to introduce him in just a second. But we're going to focus today on careers and how one transitions from a particular role to another role. And more specifically, we're going to focus on network engineering to cloud. And our special guest has multiple years of experience in both fields. And more recently, he has decided to transition to cloud and really see where he can take that with his career. So we'll find out a little bit about his kind of motivation behind that, what led him to where he is today, and the roles that he's done prior to actually getting to where he is today. And hopefully he can share some insights as to what you can do to achieve similar or the same if you are looking at going down that path. So this man needs no introduction, but because it's a podcast or whether you're watching on YouTube, I need to introduce him. And more than likely, those that are familiar with this podcast and the things that we have done in the past will probably already know who I'm talking about. But without further ado, let me introduce Du'An Lightfoot. Du'An, how's things?
Things are great. What's up, Kelvin? It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. It's been a long time. And I'm sure those that are kind of listening or watching now will, especially those that have kind of followed from, the earlier days of kind of me and you getting together and, producing content on YouTube and giving, inspirational talks, will already know that, they're in for a great session today. And, I'm just pleased that you are giving up your time to come on and, share your insights into sort of, how you navigated, if you like, your career to kind of get to where you are today. So for those that, just before we kind of get onto that, for those that don't know, me and Du'An and Erica and Antonio, we did a lot of kind of getting together in the past with YouTube videos and, basically creating content around trying to shed some insight into different roles in the industry, sort of things to look out for, and kind of giving you that motivation and enablement or empowerment for you to be able to go out there and do it yourself. So if you've not checked out those videos, I really do urge you to go head over to Du'An's YouTube channel as well. I'll share that in the description where you can watch those videos. Du'An has some very good YouTube content out there, which is very worth watching as well. But Du'An, we're here today to speak about your career and how you've navigated to kind of where you are today. You've kind of transitioned from, I wouldn't say necessarily just a senior network engineer to, what you are doing today, which is a senior cloud developer advocate, if I'm not mistaken. But just before we get to kind of those two sort of specific positions, do you want to just kind of give a little bit of background as to kind of how you got into tech and what maybe one or two of your first roles were in tech?
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin, for having me on. Shout out to the Tech Dialogue community. I got in tech actually in the year 2000 when I graduated high school. I joined the Air Force. And while I was in the Air Force, I started out on the help desk. And then from the help desk, I got into desk side support. And then from desk side support, I got into system administration. And this was back when we had Windows NT. So I was working on primary domain controllers and backup domain controllers. Fast forward a few years, I started doing network administration. And so that was my real first experience getting my hands on some routers and switches. But when I got out of the military, after spending 7 years in, I landed a help desk job because I had a hard time transferring my military experience to the civilian sector. And so I got a help desk job, and I spent about 6 years on the help desk, which was
Wow.
tough. Yeah, it was tough. This was back from 2007 to 2013. There was no Twitter. There was no, I, YouTube was still lagging. If you remember the lag on YouTube,
Right.
there was no LinkedIn. These resources weren't really available back then, and so the networking aspect, the information being freely available, that was a real challenge. So after spending time on the help desk, I ended up going to a boot camp, which we can kind of talk about that. But in that boot camp, I got several certifications from the Security Plus to the CCNA, just to name a few. And once I got that CCNA, that's when that doors like really start opening because I already had some networking experience, but now that I got this certification, it was helping me get interviews. And
Right.
then once I got my first, I would say, real networking job as a network technician, that's where I really started honing in what I was learning from the CCNA and applying it in the field, which helped me get into network engineering. And then ultimately, I started doing network automation to where I am now as a developer advocate in the cloud.
Wow. So you've done quite a few different roles to kind of get to where you are today. And that's the, as you've kind of just alluded to there, that's taken quite a long time to get to where you are today. And
Yeah,
obviously that takes a lot of time, effort, and skill to kind of navigate those different job roles and get to where you are today. And I think one important thing that I want to discuss with you is the time that you spent on the help desk, because I see in especially the black community that a lot of guys and girls actually start out on help desk roles or help desk type roles, and I often see many of them stuck in those positions and want to find a way out, but don't feel like they do have a way out. So they end up doing these roles for so long and don't feel as though they've got a path out. Now, you said you ended up doing a boot camp, and that's when things really started to open up for you. So do you just want to explain a little bit about the boot camp you did and how you decided after so long it was time to try and navigate out of the help desk type role?
yeah. I start from. I think I went on over that 6 years. I went on maybe 100 interviews. Like I went on a lot of
That's
interviews.
a
I was
lot.
going, yeah, it was a lot over the 6 year period. I was going sometimes 3 to 4 times a week to interviews. And one of the things I'll be honest about during that time, the 6 years, I wasn't serious about the work that it would take to get off of the help desk, right? I
Mm,
thought what I was learning on the help desk and my military experience, which was outdated, after a few years, those skills that you did a few years ago becomes outdated.
mhm,
But I thought what I was doing currently was enough to get me to where I wanted to go.
mhm.
And that wasn't the case. And so by going to a boot camp, it actually got me current on skills to improve my resume, to improve my interview skills, because part of it is soft skills, right?
Right.
Being able to understand what you actually do in your current role, walk into an interview and explain that clearly and effectively. And when you're asked or challenged about the things that you do and the roles that you play in their projects, you need to be able to speak to that. And so
Right.
going to this boot camp not only helped me with the certification path, but it also helped me with those soft skills to enter those interviews and be successful.
Right. And I think, that's a good point then. I think a lot of people not only just trying to get at help desk roles, but I think in general in tech, and I must admit, I'll hold my hands up that, at one point I really thought as well it was just about having the technical ability, and as long as you had that you'd be able to get through. But as you start to really get into tech and start to look at these more senior or advanced roles, if you like, you realize that people that are interviewing you or roles that you're applying for are not really just looking for those technical skills. Yes, technical skills are important, but as you said there, soft skills was a big element for you in that boot camp, which kind of helped you get through and ultimately move out of the help desk. And I think it's important for everybody that's kind of in tech, regardless of what role you're in, soft skills need to be a key focus, because whether you're dealing with customers firsthand and direct, or whether you're not customer facing, but communicating internally with other teams. I think, the soft skills are really going to stand out and allow you to navigate your career a lot faster than just having technical skills and no soft skills. Because if you don't know how to communicate with people, regardless of whether it's a customer or an colleague internally, and you don't know how to carry yourself, or you're not organized, these are things that are going to, in my opinion, start to hold you back. So I think soft skills there, what you pointed out, is very important. And I think not only did you get the technical skills obviously from the boot camp to be able to transition, but did you really walk away from that as well with the soft skills and think, this is an important aspect of what I need to kind of not only know now, but continuously improve on to move forward in your career?
It's levels to it, right? Um, Looking back, I think I always carried myself in a professional manner, but I needed to improve, right?
Mm,
I needed to, like I mentioned, be able to speak to actually what did in my role. I need to actually let the interviewer know that I am an IT professional. I'm
right.
serious about what I do, right? And so being able to clearly explain that and realize that you are always being interviewed,
Mm-hmm.
not just when you walk in the interview room, but you're being interviewed when you walk into the building. You're being
Right.
interviewed at meetups. You're being interviewed no matter where you go, and you're interacting with other professionals. You're being interviewed. Being interviewed when you're communicating on social media. You're constantly in that mode of when people's watching, learning, and wondering if you could bring value to a team or if they will even want to work with you, right?
Right.
So I think the mindset just has to be, okay, I'm serious about my career. And so in all things I do, I'm gonna be a professional, whether it's when I'm on my job, off my job. And that's how I just had to kind of change my mindset.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable. And it kind of just came to me a moment ago when you was kind of discussing that. When I went through university and did what I needed to do to kind of get into or break into the industry, I always remember applying for my first role at Cisco, and my role's a bit well. The way I got into Cisco was a bit crazy. And for those that don't know, I've done an interview with Du'An on his YouTube channel, so you can check that out. But I always remember when I got into Cisco and I started communicating with the more senior level engineers, those that already had, certifications like CCIEs and had been in the industry and around the block 20 times over. The way I initially carried myself in terms of the way I communicated was very different to the way that I communicate now. And I wanted to point that out because it's one thing that actually got called out, or it's a piece of feedback that I got given to me by a more senior engineer as I was kind of starting out. And it wasn't that I was necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just that the way that I was communicating wasn't really as professional as it could be. And he was giving me feedback to say, look, just be aware of this, because when you're speaking with customers and coming across in that sort of manner, it might not seem professional. And that was something that I didn't even know I was doing, because that's just the way I was. So I think I got into Cisco because I had what it took to get into Cisco, and I had clearly some technical knowledge as well as some soft skills. But engineers were, or an engineer pointed this out to me, and that's one thing that's kind of stuck with me, and I was more conscious of that to say to myself every day, well, am I carrying myself correctly? Am I speaking not necessarily correctly, but just being more conscious of the way that I'm talking? Because you know yourself in the industry, whether you're, as you said, you're being interviewed often, almost all the time, and whether you're speaking to colleagues or speaking to customers, there's a certain way you need to carry yourself inside of a work environment as opposed to outside an environment. So I think that's an important point to make on the soft skills. So I think, so fast forward, so you've done the boot camp and you've then transitioned to what role when you've kind of completed the boot camp? How did you complete the boot camp and then manage to find a role doing what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it's weird how my career has worked out because there's several places that I always wanted to work, and during those 6 years, I applied pretty much at all of them and got told no, right, multiple
Yeah.
times. And so once I was graduating in the boot camp, there was this company that I wanted to work for, but like I mentioned before, I got told no previously. So I applied for the job. I go into the interview, and granted, the location was about 40 acres. It had a lot of buildings. I want to say
Mm-hmm.
over 30 buildings across this 40 acres. And it was, but the location was pretty much layer two, really flat. And I go into the interview and they're asking me questions. And so the first thing they mentioned was like, you know what, you seem like you're really good with people. And I was like, yeah, I love people. And that was awesome. It was like, how do you feel about working on the help desk and doing some networking? I was like, I've done help desk, I don't mind that, but I really want to do networking, right?
Right.
And so as we're talking, we're really hitting it off. And they were like, well, we want to make you an offer. We want to bring you in. But you're going to have to split your time between doing the help desk side as well as the networking side because we're very short staffed. It's a manufacturing company. And so if you ever worked in manufacturing, they do more with less, you know? So I get the job offer. I go into the role. In the role, I'm doing desk side support. I'm doing some server admin with Windows, VMware, and then I'm also doing networking.
Mm-hmm.
So that really taught me things like VTP, spanning tree, EIGRP. So everything was pretty much layer two, flat. And then we stood up a new production, which I would design with the VSS. And so from there, that's when I kind of like really got deep into, I would
Yeah.
say, the CCNP level knowledge. And that it was just an amazing experience just being in that one role.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I can imagine how you felt. Well, in fact, I can't really imagine how you felt when you went for the interview and they said that you need to be doing help desk at least for some part of the role again. I can imagine that you were thinking, well, here we go again, sort of thing. I'm never going to get away from it, sort of thing. But then I guess when you got on to doing the networking stuff, I think, did you really see that as now, or did the company actually see it as, well, yeah, this guy's good at what he's doing in the networking side of things. Let's kind of focus or keep his attention on that. And then did you gradually move away from that, or were there still elements in that role where you were still working on the help desk?
Yeah, I want to go back to something that you mentioned about me going into the interview and they mentioning me still
Mm-hmm.
doing help desk. There'll be times in your career when you may feel like you're better than something or you are above something or you don't want to get your hands dirty. I kind of looked at it as, okay, if you're telling me that I can do networking, but I still got to do this, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to where I want to be,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so I went into the role and I still had to do the extra stuff, but I was able to do the networking. There was no real possibility for me to get the title as a network engineer because there was no network engineer title on the site.
Right.
But I was able to get more projects, more responsibility in the role. And to me, responsibilities, projects is way more important than the title. That
Right.
experience is what's going to really matter, right? Because if you can put that experience on a resume, talk about it in the interview, at the end of the day, the title will come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think
You know?
that's an important point, because I think, thinking back at when I've applied for different roles, you never go to an interview and, or at least I've never been to an interview and the person that's interviewing me says, what were you or what's your current job title, or what's your previous job title. It's more about what experience do you have, what exposure do you have, and how can you prove it to us in the interview. So I think that's a really important point, because I think early in my career, I didn't necessarily get stuck on the different type of roles that were out there or the titles that were out there, but I did know people that were fixated with getting a particular title, signed to them as a job title, and
Right.
it never really made sense to me because you know, I've been around the block in terms of work, not just in tech. And
Right.
I know that the job title is just a name. It's what you're doing in that role that really makes the difference. So, you could be a security engineer and not really do anything to do with security. You might create a couple of ACLs on a firewall, and that's about it. That to me, that don't mean you're a security engineer. If you came for an interview with me, I'd be looking at okay, well, what security knowledge do you have? I won't care about your titles. I think that's a really important thing just to point out, because I think people really get fixated on the different job titles out there, and I don't think that's the way to move forward, right?
I could see your point, but everybody has a different motivation, right? Some people care
That's
about
true.
work-life balance. I don't.
Hmm.
Like, I believe life is work.
Yeah.
As long as you live it, you're gonna be working. So
Right.
when it comes to work-life balance, as long as I have a job that allows me to take the time when I need it, then we good. I give as much as needed to a position. But for some people, that work-life balance and being able to work and balance their lives is really important.
Hmm.
And then so for other people, it's financial.
Right.
That's important. So it's all about what motivates a person. I'm not going to knock anybody for going after a particular title. If that's what
Hmm.
fulfills them, great.
Right. Right. Exactly. No, no, exactly. And so going back to sort of, so you've started working now on, or at least within networking and doing network related tasks. Did you at the time have any networking related certifications, or did getting that role and actually starting to work on network related tasks actually lead to the CCNAs and stuff that you spoke about at the very start?
Yeah. So it's I don't know if you remember, CompTIA certifications used to never expire,
Hmm.
right? My A plus is one of those certifications that I have that never expires. I attempted to pass the Network Plus in my help desk role, and I failed it by like 3 points. And then that was at the deadline of for it to never expire. When I went into the network technician role, in that role, I was in the boot camp, finishing up the boot camp, and then I end up getting my CCNA because of the experience in that role.
Right.
And then that also, like I mentioned, prepared me for like the CCNP switch. And I passed that, I think, on the first time or something, just because I've seen everything in the network. I either configured it, built it, troubleshot it, or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So that prepared me. The only part I really struggled in was the routing, because I think routing is one of those things you really have to lab up. And so I
Right.
still passed that in the first time, but um, when I got into an actual environment, this is kind of moving ahead. One of the things I struggled with was BGP, because the
Hmm.
old CCNP really didn't go too deep into BGP like that.
Right, right. And I think you've kind of raised something that I want to talk about a little bit. So you said you didn't really have, that sort of level of certification, the CCNAs or the really the foundational stuff, and but you were also doing the role already. So I guess this we're talking years ago. So times have changed, but I see a
Right.
lot of people now trying to get into tech, and they are getting knocked back or feel as though they need to have particular certifications or degrees or work experience, as I say, before they can actually get into a role. Obviously you've done it the other way around, where you may have had one or two, but you kind of really started to look at those sort of foundational certifications and onto the professional certifications when you already had a role. So what advice would you really give to people that are really trying to get into tech and can't get a job because they don't have the experience? Do you think certifications is a good route to start out with?
I think certifications are great, right? It gives you a learning path. It kind of validates your skills. It checks a box when you're going for the interview. It does all that. But what I really think is the most important is building something, labbing it up, and then sharing that out. Like you
Lab
got
every
a great
day.
blog, lab every day. You have a great blog. If you're a software developer, you should have code on your GitHub. If you're a network engineer, you should have a blog, a YouTube channel. You should have something to validate the things that you're learning and things and showing yourself in action. I think to me that right there um, is really important in today's industry, right? I think a few
Yeah.
years ago, certifications were everything, but I think now since everything is going cloud, DevOps, network automation, they want to see what you can actually do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, there's few good things that I want to talk about here because, yes, we've seen transitions in sort of the way that, tech is moving, and we will, touch on that with sort of the role that you're now doing a little bit later on. But one of the things that you touched on there, I believe, is really important, and I really want to highlight it because I often tell people that reach out to me and ask me for guidance and information what I'm about to say now. So you spoke about, aside from the certifications, the labbing that you're doing, if you're doing coding or software development, whatever it is, if you've got a way to demonstrate that and document that, then do so. And I stand by the same thing because I always say use that, you might not have the work experience, like actually working for companies and getting that experience, but being able to document and share and prove that some of these, you kind of got skills in particular areas aside, outside of the certification, that stands for something, just like you give a resume or a CV to an employer. Use your GitHub repository, use your YouTube channel, use your blog as a tool or your resume, an addition to your resume to say, look, this is proof that I can do or I've done X, Y, and Z in a particular project. Because these are the things, aside from the, not having the experience, are the things that are going to stand out and make you as an individual different from the rest that are also applying for that same position that might not have also done that. It's one thing being able to say, yes, I've got a particular certification, and then sitting down in an interview and saying that and maybe demonstrating a few skills that pertain to that certification. But I just think it's so much more valuable if you're able to say to somebody, look what I've done, look at this project that I did, and demonstrate that you are not only knowledgeable in that particular area to an extent, but you're also keen about what it is that you're doing and you really mean business. And I think that's really going to make a difference. I think sorry, were you going to say something?
No, no, go ahead.
And I think the I think without certifications, yes, it's maybe a little bit more difficult to get into particular roles in this day and age. But again, you kind of pointed out that the market's transition, the way that tech is kind of moving, it's all changing the way that people work because of COVID. It's changed everything. The way that the world works now has changed as well, and there is a lot more opportunity for people wanting to transition into tech or wanting to change roles in tech to be able to do that without having the necessary skills or certifications, because a lot of companies these days are looking or willing to actually train individuals if they show willingness to actually be trained. So I think what I would say is that yes, certifications are valuable. I will never not say they're not valuable, but take for instance the cybersecurity industry. There's a global shortage. There has been for some time now. You just cannot employ the right people or the right amount of people in roles that are currently open. So there's a lot of companies out there that are looking at taking people on at more junior levels and giving them that training to be able to upskill and have a career within that particular industry, and that's
Right.
without certification. So I think what I would say to anybody that's looking at getting into the industry and not necessarily having the certifications or work experience, don't think that's the be all and end all, because there is other ways to get into tech.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a bunch of ways of getting into tech. Is My path is different than Kevin's path. Antonio's path is different than and Erica's
Right.
path is different than Kevin's path. We all have different paths. What I will focus on is one of the things you mentioned. If you happen to get out of opportunity, even if you don't get an opportunity, becoming a self learner is half the battle
Hmm.
to being successful in this industry, in my opinion. If you have to be told what to learn, if you have to be given a learning path from your job, if you're waiting on your job to pay for your training, that's going to hold you. You're holding yourself back. You have to really hone your skills to be a self learner. And following people like Kelvin, following people like Network Chuck, following people that are out here doing it,
Like
that are,
you.
yeah, like me. Yeah, but in all seriousness, I think, really focusing on not just being a self learner, but how do you learn, right?
Mhm.
Is it through videos? Is it through books? Finding people that are doing what you want to do, that are talking about the things that you want to learn, that are sharing the information, keeping track of those resources, right? And then documenting what you're learning along the way and doing it on your own with nobody having to tell you to do it. If you can do
Exactly.
that, then you walk into a job, you're not going to have a problem when that challenge comes up, because now you know how to Google, now you
Mhm.
know how to look at documentation, now you know how to deal with that gut wrenching feeling of that outage and the pain that you can have in IT when things go wrong.
Being out of your comfort zone,
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing as well. And I think, we'll be saying probably in the next year or so, being able to use Chat GPT to get answers. Who knows? We'll see. But I think that's a perfect segue actually into kind of getting on to how you transition from, network engineer up to the more senior network engineer. And the reason I say it's a perfect segue is because you alluded to it just then. Basically, if you don't stay on top of your skill set, if you don't go out there and make it happen for yourself, nobody else is going to do that for you. So if you don't do that, you're basically going to become stale, or you're going to become that individual that is quite happy just doing the same job for X amount of years without a pay rise or without any sort of promotion and not really get anywhere. So I think what I would say is being able to kind of have a career and move to sort of the more senior roles requires the ability, and not even just moving to senior roles, just being able to have a career where you're going to be relevant requires you to be able to go out there and, like you say, make things happen for yourself and hone your skill set to how you want it to be. Because we've seen more recently all these companies that are laying off so many different members of staff. The tech industry at the minute is having, a real problem with layoffs. And if you ever encounter yourself being in that sort of position, and you are one of them people that have not gone out there and made it happen, and you maybe have, let's say, for instance, a certification that you got 10 years ago, an entry level certification, and now you're working more at a professional level. And yes, the experience is going to count for something, but I think it's going to be a lot harder for you to actually transition to another company or to a more senior role. So I think leading into you and moving to senior roles, did you kind of find yourself then thinking, right, now I need to start looking at the CCMPs or the more advanced certifications in order to make this jump to senior network engineer? And a following question on that, did you transition to a senior network engineer in the same company, or did you move to another company?
So to answer your question, when I got my CCNA, I went straight to the CCNP. Like I was so thirsty for knowledge. I was so passionate about labbing. I didn't want to stop, right?
Right.
But the only reason I stopped is because I started making YouTube videos. Looking back, looking back, like I'm thankful I did it, but looking back, I was so because it's a mindset to go for the CCIE.
Right.
You've attempted it twice.
Yeah.
Antonio, I think, did it like 5 times. Erica's done it a few times. It's a real mindset to where you got to eliminate those distractions. That got to be the thing you focus on. And so now, to answer your question, I kept going for the CCNP. To get into the senior role, it wasn't something that I really like sought after per se because my career wasn't a straight line, right?
Right.
I went from a network technician to a network lead. And funny story, when we talk about you always being interviewed, I just went to this training center where I graduated from. They were having like an alumni event. And so I just went to connect with everybody, say hello. And I'm talking to this guy. We're having some great conversation. And I think we even had a beer, right? And so he was like, "So what are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm currently a network technician at this company. I'm working on 2960s. I just installed a 4500 switch on the VSS. I'm really enjoying it, right?" And he was like, "You ever thought about making a change?" And I'm like, "Well, a little bit." And at the time, I had got an offer, but then turned it down because the company gave me a raise for me to stay. But it still wasn't the amount of money I wanted to make, right? And so while we're talking, he's like, "Well, how about we go in here and talk? I'm gonna have my colleague come over." And so he has his colleague come over. We're just talking, having a conversation. Colleague asked me a couple questions. I answer them, and they were like, "Well, you mind if we get your number?" And so while I'm on my way home, they called me and offered me a job right then and there as a
Wow.
network lead to come lead the day shift team for their knock.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's why I
Just
say
off a conversation.
just off a conversation, like they could see my passion. They knew that I was a self learner and I just want to grow, and they wanted me on the team.
So do you think connection, just kind of before you carry on, do you think connecting with people, whether that's in person or virtually, as a lot of us do today, is a very important part of being able to navigate and look for positions in tech? Because there's a saying, isn't there, that sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. Do you think that's true?
I don't think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, I don't think it's who you know. I think it's who knows you,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can know a lot of people, but that don't mean they'll help you.
Right.
But if
Right.
people know you for what you do, they know you because of they can trust you, they know you because of all of these things, that's when the opportunities come.
Right.
I mean, that's just what I believe. What are your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, I think personally it is important to network, whether it's virtually or in person, with like-minded individuals, because sometimes you'll come across people that you maybe want to cross paths with, but haven't had the chance to do so just off the back of a conversation. Or if you are out there putting out content, documenting the work that you do and the projects that you do, who knows, one day you might create something cool as a weekend project, and somebody might look at that and think, wow, this is quite a cool thing to do, and let's spark a conversation off the back of that. And then, as you say, it's not sometimes who you know, is who knows you, because then off the back of you putting that out there into the world, this person's then coming back to you and wanting to connect. And I form many connections like that. I still form connections like that today. I've had people reach out to me because of content that I put out on YouTube, and got sponsorship deals from companies to create content, or to put out advertisements for them. And that's just based on me putting things out there as opposed to me knowing who to approach and to get that sort of, that sort of, because I wouldn't know where to go. I don't know these people. I've had CEOs of companies reaching out to me via email because of the content that I put out there, and asking if I'd be open to doing some work with them, creating content for them. And again, I either know the company but would not think twice to reach out to them, or I don't know them, but they've kind of reached out to me because they see me putting out this content in my case, and want to reach out. So I think that's a really good point, Du'An. Actually, I've never really looked at it like that from that perspective, but I think I think you're right in that point.
Man, my last two jobs were because of who knew me.
Mm.
I didn't know these people, right?
It's crazy.
I didn't know them. They knew me, and never had a conversation with them. So it's interesting how life kind of works. Sometimes you don't plan for things; you just prepare for things, and really don't know what you're preparing for. You're just preparing for it, right? I set out on this network automation journey because I wanted to learn, but I didn't know what I was prepared for. I didn't know that learning Python was going to help me create a Python for network engineers course at Cisco. You know what I mean? Who would have thought that? Like,
exactly.
Set out to do. I just wanted to learn Python so I could automate the network.
It's crazy because I remember when you just started getting into sort of the programming stuff, and yeah, just remember, it's crazy to see how far you've kind of come just in that particular space to what you're doing now. And I guess leading on now to, again, another perfect segue from moving from senior network engineer. So you've kind of done the senior network engineer stuff. You've got the certifications, and you've got to a point now where, as you just said, you're starting to do some programming, you're playing around with Python, you're learning that. What kind of made you think now's the time to maybe move from being a senior network engineer to what you're doing now, or ultimately what led to you the role you're doing now as a senior cloud developer advocate? Because I think a lot of people are quite happy to, or a lot of people really that'll be listening or watching this would be quite happy to get to a senior network engineer position and be quite comfortable just to continue doing the 9 to 5 job every day and going home. What kind of led, there must have been something in you that was saying, this is not enough, I want something else, I want to try something else. What kind of made you do that?
Two things. First, the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
When the pandemic happened, I was working pretty much 5 a.m. to 7, 8 o'clock at night. I had nothing to do, and I loved my job. Pandemic would have never happened. I probably would still be doing what I was doing because I loved it so much, right? But I kind of got burnt out. The second thing is that, and this may be a topic that goes back to what we were talking about before with titles. In that role, I was doing network engineer 50% of the time. The other 50% of the time I was doing network automation. Well, a couple things happened where if I did A, B should have happened. And those things didn't happen. And so the last time, all I wanted was a title change from senior network engineer to infrastructure automation engineer. That's all I wanted. And so that didn't happen, right? And so at some point, you got to look at your career and say, all right, what's important to me? Because you can stay at a company and you can chase the carrot, right? And then they let you go. Or you can say, you know what? I've given everything. I've held my end of the deal, right? And each time that I held my end of the deal, even though this was promised to me and it doesn't happen, should I continue to stay? Mm-hmm. Right. And so between that and being burnt out, things just kind of aligned when this position came to me. And it's like, you know what? I think it'd be fun to go do this developer advocate thing. So let's try it.
Cool. No, that I think that's true. I think when you get to a point in some roles, regardless of enjoying what you do, where you feel as though you've got to the end, or you don't really have any sort of KPIs to work towards anymore because you just keep meeting them, without even thinking about it. And that's all well and good. Maybe it's going to keep your job, but I think for the curious, for those that really want to develop their careers or explore, I think it's important to realize that and not to be shy from moving away and trying new things. And that goes for me as well, because one of my previous positions, I spent a lot of time in that and I enjoyed that, and probably would still be doing it now if I didn't have a conversation with a couple of people who put the thought in my head and said, have you ever thought about kind of just exploring other avenues, other positions? You never know what you might find. And at the time, I was receptive to that because I was quite happy doing what I was doing. But then one day I really thought about it and I started looking, just browsing for internal positions, just to see what was about. And, there was a few that caught my attention and I thought, wow, maybe this is something that I could, help develop me further and allow me to further advance at a quicker pace than what I was doing in the current role. And so I decided to apply for that position, that particular position, and that's a position that I'm doing today. And it as you say, it's crazy how things turn out because I'm absolutely enjoying that role. I've got the opportunity. I had the opportunity to really take things into my own hands, not like I didn't in my previous position, but I really had a chance to hone my skills in a particular product set, which was interesting because I've never had that opportunity. I worked across so many different technologies and now I was just kind of focused on one. It was a little bit strange to me, but at the same time, it were exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And then at the same time, I've had the opportunity now to, become that more senior person and that person that people look up to. And that's all off the back of just somebody sparking that flame in my head and say, have you ever thought about just, taking a look and seeing what else is out there? And I think, like you say, it's important to do that. I think, people get so stuck in and consumed in what they're doing and busy, rightly so, in doing what they're doing, they forget to kind of look at themselves and maybe look at other things that are going on that might help, not only if they are looking for money to kind of maybe move because you're going to get more money going elsewhere, or move because you're going to be able to further explore what you enjoy doing at a whole new level sort of thing. So I think that's important. So I think for you moving then to or transitioning from network engineer to senior cloud developer advocate, do you just want to explain a little bit about what that particular role entails, what you do on a kind of day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so when it comes to being a developer advocate, which it's like you're basically a bridge between the organization service teams, for instance, the team that develops the Amazon VPC, and then the customers.
Right.
You work with the customers to ensure that they're getting the best experience possible with those services. You engage them to ensure that their needs are being met. You support them at meetups. You support them at community events. You're you're that real bridge to ensure that they're getting the best experience with that service and with the company. And then on the service team side, you're working with them for those announcements, those new releases, as well as getting feedback to the service team to say, hey, the customers are experiencing this. I think we can improve it this way. And so
Right.
you're like that bridge in between the two.
So I think there's a few things that kind of stand out to me, and obviously I see a lot of what you're doing on online as well. Do you feel like your soft skills are a lot more important now than they've potentially ever been? Because I see you out there doing presentations, live videos and events, and it's not just about being able to deliver technically. I think those soft skills that you now possess have kind of helped you come a long way. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, but even today, learning the journey of growing never stops.
Right.
I think it my soft skills in the past prepared me for where I am today, but I even need to grow now. Like I joined Toastmasters because I want to improve my public speaking. I want to improve my my cues on how I use my hands and my pauses of when I speak, the tone, the inflection of when I speak. Like there's always room to grow, right?
Right.
Even when you get to CCIE, you, the journey does not stop then. So I think everything that I did before prepared me for where I am now, but I'm still learning.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to make note of Toastmasters actually, because yeah, that's something that I want to look at as well. I think that's important. And I think, it's interesting that we're having this conversation because, we're not just talking about technical certifications and, we just kind of touched on the, Toastmasters, which is all about public speaking and, how you carry yourself. And again, it comes back to those soft skills aside from technical skills. But I guess it's not improving yourself just technically. I think the soft skills always need to be improved as well. Like you said, I think that never ends as well, because as you said, you can always improve yourself in the way that you do things.
You can always improve yourself. Toastmasters is one way. Another way is joining meetup groups. You can go to meetups and present at meetups to get feedbacks, get practice on creating presentations, and then present that presentation to get feedback. Um, there's a lot when it comes to soft skills on how I can improve, and I believe how others can improve as well. That's one part of the
Mm,
battle. Of course, the technical side is extremely important,
hmm.
and even that depends, because if you get in leadership, what you know technically can help you, but you really need to understand people at that point. You
Right.
really need to understand the business at that point. You really need to understand leadership at that
Hmm.
point. Like where is the best use of allocating your time? Some managers like to be knee deep with their troops, boots on the ground. But it's kind of hard to have the forecasting, the foresight, the overview of the team if you're in the weeds with them. So there's different leadership approach, and just understanding how to best lead your team is important if you do get in leadership.
Yeah, there are definitely levels to that. And another thing that kind of stood out to me as you were kind of just saying that is I'm currently working on the CISSP certification, and it's very different to any Cisco or Microsoft or any of the other certifications I've ever worked on before. And it's because this certification particularly focuses on looking at information security and some of the technical elements more from a managerial point of view, as opposed to having that purely technical mindset. And I'm going through the book, and the book has questions at the end of every chapter. And the first couple of chapters I did, even though I've got experience within security and information security, when I was answering these questions, I was getting a lot of them wrong. And it really threw me off because I thought, well, why am I getting a lot of these wrong? And the reason is because certifications like this focus on technology and information security in particular at a higher level, at a more managerial level. So there's levels to this. So while, like you say, you might be speaking to CISOs that, maybe are very technical, but they don't want to kind of delve too deep into the technical detail because they're speaking to C-level execs, which don't need to know that. So you need the ability to be able to still understand technology, but talk at a particular level for them to be able to understand, and you to be able to articulate that information to them. So I think, that's another important factor, and that's one thing that I'm learning now as I'm kind of going through this certification. You need to be able to shift your mindset, and again, depending on who you're speaking to, be able to shift your mindset, because that's important, right?
It's really important. It's really important. Sometimes you don't know that until you get in those situations. Then you realize, wait a minute, the way they're communicating, I don't feel comfortable, right? I need to grow. And so you grow. You figure out how to grow. You find somebody that can provide you feedback on where to grow, and then you focus on that.
Right. And just on presentations, so we spoke about you doing a lot of presentations and getting involved in that. Was there ever a point, and I'm sure there was, where you were nervous to be delivering presentations in front of groups of people, or whether that be online or in person? And how did you begin to overcome that? Was it a case of just kind of throwing yourself out of your comfort zone and conquering that, or was it kind of other methods and tactics you used to be able to do that?
Yeah, only time I'm nervous is if I'm not confident in the information I'm presenting, right?
Right.
Prepare, 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 and prepare some more. And so the more I can prepare for a talk, a presentation, the more comfortable I'm gonna be, because getting in front of people is something I never had a problem doing. I used to rap in front of thousands of people on
Right.
stage, so that doesn't really bother me. And I don't mind making mistakes. I know how to recover from those, so that don't really bother me either. Is the fact when the information that I want to present, I can't find the words for
Mm-hmm.
to speak, because there's one way to speak to an audience technically, right? And
Right.
you can sound like you're kind of reading from a slide, and that could be boring. But it's another way to tell a story technically when it resonates with an audience. Like, how does talking about Amazon VPC, what does that mean to the audience? Like, how do I talk to network engineers about networking in the cloud? Well, first of all, I need to speak to them in a language they understand. Let's
Right.
talk about routing. What do you know about BGP? Let's talk about hybrid connectivity and connecting with VPN. Let's talk about routing tables and subnets and ACLs and all that good stuff.
Right, exactly. And I think another point there is that it also, when it comes to presenting, you need to know who you're presenting to. If you have an audience that is mainly focused on business or business requirements, you're probably not going to get into the nitty-gritty of BGP and all the technical elements, but you're
Right.
going to speak about our solution can help meet business requirements. And I think that's another important aspect of being able to understand your audience and being able to deliver to that particular audience as well. And I think,
Yep.
how do you tend to work out the sort of feel from your audience, and kind of if they're enjoying the sort of content that you're presenting, or if it's too high level or low level?
It depends. I look at my audience. It's always good to connect with a few people in the audience, right? Um, I've seen times where people may get up and leave in a talk, and that may shake you. But if you're at an event that has multiple event like sessions going on, people may get up and leave because there's another session they want to attend. May not have nothing to do with you, or they come into the wrong session, right?
Right.
Oh, I thought this was another session, so they get up and leave after you talk about the title and what you're going to be talking about, or they're not interested in the topic, and it has nothing to do with you. So don't ever take that personal. And when it comes to resonating with the audience, I think if you're prepared and you're delivering it, that don't worry about the reaction of the audience, because if they're engaged, they may not react. They just may be watching and listening because they're trying to soak up all that information. I listened to something the other day, and it was talking about when you speak and you say or those weasel words they call them
Mm-hmm.
when you speak, that actually distracts people from hearing what you're about to say.
Right.
So being prepared and then not using those weasel words and pausing to give the audience time to digest what you're saying, I think that right there is Just focusing on delivering the content clearly, effectively, and then getting feedback at the end.
Right.
Because the feedback is how you're going to learn how the audience receive the information, and it's going to help you improve. Never be afraid of feedback.
Definitely. And I think with that feedback, just quickly on that, I think sometimes you are going to receive constructive criticism, and it's important to be able to analyze that and not take it in necessarily a negative way, but to use that to be able to grow. And I think that's really what I think it comes down to, similar to working outside of your comfort zone. I feel like you grow more when you're working outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
When you're delivering presentations and you're getting constructive feedback, it's important to take that on board and to grow from that as well, because at the end of the day, it's going to make you a better presenter, a better speaker, and more confident ultimately. Would you agree?
I agree.
Cool. So I think, we're pretty much at time now, but I just want to speak about quickly sort of why cloud and from networking, and is there still elements within the cloud that are particularly relevant to networking? Because you spent a lot of time in networking, you've got a lot of certifications and experience in networking. Would you say that those skills are now irrelevant, or would you say that you still use those skills now?
I think my skills are different. I think the knowledge that I learned before is important. Um, I recently started a blog post series, part one, reimagining the network engineer.
Mm-hmm.
The first blog in that series is titled Why we need to transition. I don't think network engineering is dead, right, or is going to die, but I do think it's going to evolve, and you'll have to evolve. I've seen it happen with the system administrator. I've seen it happen with the telecom techs. I've seen it happen several times in my career. And
Right.
so when we think about network engineering, the cost savings, the speed, the agility, the scale that you get from the cloud is hard to produce on premises.
Mm.
And so when you talk about the skills that you have currently, well, BGP is in the cloud,
Mm-hmm.
right? IP addressing and subnetting is in the cloud. Understanding how to troubleshoot networks is in the cloud.
Right.
Security is in the cloud. And, and, and sometimes companies will still have an on-premises presence.
Right.
So they may have a workload on premises and they may have a workload in the cloud.
Hybrid.
Hybrid. And to establish that connectivity between on premises and the cloud, you're going to have to understand VPNs. So,
Exactly.
so a lot of what you learned and what you know now is still relevant. Um, but the thing is, there may be less of those jobs in demand for a network engineer because if you don't have skills in network automation, if you don't know how to use Ansible, Terraform, there may be less jobs in demand if you don't understand cloud and cloud connectivity and VPCs. There may be less jobs in demand if you don't understand VPNs and how to establish that connectivity. So all I want to do is get people to think and not be at the end when it's too late, when
Right.
things really do happen, because it can happen fast.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen fast. If you think about it, companies refresh hardware at what, every 3 years? And when that time comes, they may decide, well, we can save $1 million or 300,000 or however many X that capital expenditure is in the cloud if we decide not to refresh.
Right. So would you say then that, and I agree, by the way, and would you say that for those that are in networking roles at the moment or have networking related certifications, think we agree that, you know, the foundational knowledge is still required and that's not going to go nowhere. But would you say that it's it's an important time, or it's, you know, we're in the middle of a transition, and it's beneficial is probably the right word to start looking at cloud related environments and how to configure, maintain, troubleshoot them, whether it's through certifications or not? Because I think I'll just say my piece on it. I think it's important. I've seen over the last few years that I've been doing or carrying out my roles, more and more customers I talk to today are now in some form of hybrid deployment state with their environment. So they've got on-premise servers for particular workloads, and then the rest of it is shifted to the cloud. And the conversations we have are mainly around, within the next few years, we're looking at having a fully deployed cloud environment as opposed to on-prem. So I think, at least from my experience, that being able to navigate these different cloud environments is very important. And I don't think, in terms of technologies or the way that each different vendor works in the cloud, is going to be that different. But I think it is beneficial to start learning now. And that's one thing I've done. You know, I've started to pick up cloud related certifications and training, because not only does it interest me, but security in the domain that I work in, security is everywhere, as you know. And now I'm starting to have conversations around securing cloud environments. And I need to be able to have those conversations, which means I need to know what I'm talking about when it comes to different cloud environments. So even though I started off as a network engineer, transitioned to security engineering, I've now got a foot, to some extent, in cloud environments, because that's the way it's going. Not because, yes, I am interested in it, but I think what's accelerated it for me is the fact that I'm having conversations with customers that are making that transition, which means that I need to be able to have those conversations to stay relevant.
Yeah. If you look at, and I'll pose this to the listeners that are network engineers. The question I have: do you have a cloud team that manages the cloud infrastructure?
Right.
The second question is, are you connecting VPNs to the cloud? When I was in my senior network engineer role, I was connecting VPNs to AWS. I would get the IP address, stand up the VPN, and then the workload has bi-directional connectivity once the ACL is in, whatever. The thing I didn't know and I was curious about is what's on the other side. What's on that cloud? What is in the cloud?
What is it?
What is the magic that's happening, right? And I think if you're in that situation where you have a cloud team that is managing the infrastructure, or you're standing up VPNs to the cloud, learn the cloud.
Yeah, definitely.
Learn the cloud. Like, take some time, get familiar. Whatever provider that your company has, go to that cloud team, ask them questions. Whoever is the architect that designed the VPN connectivity to the cloud, talk to them about what's going on. How is that? There's a direct connect. How is this connectivity happening? And then learn the cloud.
Great advice.
Just be curious. Yeah. Learn and be curious.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think, back to my point in terms of experience, even if you are somebody watching or listening that isn't necessarily working in cloud environments now, that's not to say that in the next 6 months or the next year you're not going to be doing that. So why not, if you want to stay relevant, if you want to learn something new, why not start doing that now? Because I think I agree with you, Du'An. You know, the time is going to come where network engineers, or engineers, regardless of being network and security engineers, whatever it may be, will be having conversations and working in cloud related environments. It don't matter about the job title.
It's it's an interesting time. I remember when I started my network automation journey in 2018, I was late to the party, right? I'm starting this cloud journey and I'm late to the party. But when I started the network automation, I was ahead of a lot of people, right?
Right.
The cloud journey is kind of the same way right now. If you could learn this, there's opportunity there that if you couple that with network automation, it can open up some doors. I believe this is my opinion. I could be wrong, but from what I see from the jobs that I get contacted on, from the people that I communicate with, learning networking, learning automation, learning the cloud, it's like a trifecta.
Definitely. I think that's great advice. And look, we're pretty much at time now. Du'An, it's been a pleasure having you on Tech Dialogue today. It's a pleasure, obviously, always talking to you anyway. It's nice to catch up again. I will be sharing those that are interested in following Du'An, if you're not already. I will be sharing his socials on the YouTube channel as well, so do look out for them, and you can follow him on Twitter at Lab Everyday. I'll share that as well. But yeah, Du'An, thank you for joining today and sharing that great advice, and I look forward to seeing how you continue to deliver and progress in what you're doing. I've seen sort of the great things that you're doing and continue to do, and I'm looking forward to, as always, you always giving back to the community in the best way that you can. So thank you.
Hey, same to you, Kelvin. I appreciate you having me on. Shout out to the community. We got to get you on my channel. We got to do some more stuff together, man.
Definitely. I think, just before we close, a lot of people have reached out in the past and said, we need to kind of get that back going. We need to see you, Erica, Antonio, dropping those gems again. And I've been like, yeah, don't worry, it's gonna come, So yeah, definitely, I'm open to that. As always, as let's give the people what they need, man.
Dang, we're gonna make it happen, family.
All right, Du'An, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.